is not much. But depending on your interest, we can stretch this to even 10 hours. So it all depends on how much interest you need to show and how much interactive we can make it. I try to make interactive to the extent possible. But I would expect participation from all of you. Before I go into the valuation, what is the overview of valuation? How many of you have done actually the valuation? Okay, 167 people. You have done the valuation. Now, how many of you invest in stock market? Almost everybody. Okay. So actually, when you do invest in the stock market, what do you do? Sir, what do you do when you invest in stock market? Sorry? Yeah, so you see ATS. And so, when I asked, you said you are not in valuation, but you invest in stock market. Whenever you are investing in stock market, actually what you are doing a valuation. You are, when you are buying a share, you are being bullish on that particular share because you feel that the current price at which it is traded in the stock market is lower, and in future you expect to earn higher price. So you expect to get the capital gains. So by doing that, you are doing a valuation. Now, when you invest in stock market, what you will do? Either you will ask some friend, or you will ask, you get some tip from somewhere, or read some research report, and you invest. That is in that case, maybe you are not doing a valuation per se, but you are investing because somebody else has told you. But if you do your own analysis and then invest in stock market, actually you are doing a valuation because then you are taking a call on that company's prospects, and of course, overall economy and other things, Sensex and all that. So by and large, we all do valuation. And when you buy in the stock market, you are bullish about the company, so you buy. But at the same time, somebody else is selling, then only you can buy. So when you are bullish on a particular company, somebody else is not bullish on that company. Unless somebody sells the shares under a distress sale, where he needs money for whatever reason he needs. Otherwise, that person is not bullish on that company, but you are bullish on that company. So always, there is for any transaction to take place, you need a buyer and a seller. And buyer is optimistic, seller is not optimistic. About the same company, about the same fundamentals, and about the same knowledge which is available in public domain. So whenever you are buying a share, you have all the information in public domain. On that basis, you do analysis and you buy the share. With the same information, somebody else is selling the share. So he is not bullish on the company. So this represents actually what is the valuation, because valuation is an opinion. It is not something which you come out with some number and you say this is the valuation. It is an opinion. So normally, suppose if same data is given to 10 chartered accountants in the room, all 10 of them will come with a different numbers. It's not that they are wrong, because each person analyzes the company in its own manner and then decides that how this company should be valued. So suppose if I was to ask you, how will you value Nestle today? Can anybody answer? What are the issues which you face in Nestle if you want to do valuation?
Firstly, brand is getting impacted.
Yeah.
So basically, Nestle had a brand. Maggi was around 20% of the sale of India because it was coming from Maggi. So with this kind of whatever is happening, the brand is getting impacted. So first of all, what will happen to the sales? Whatever they will take it back, that is fine. But whether they will be able to introduce the same product again in the market, what will happen to that brand? What will happen to the other products of Nestle? And there are challenges. So what will happen? Presently there is a turmoil. So it's very difficult to say whether they will be able to sustain for next 6 months or 9 months. What will happen? It is very difficult to know. But definitely the sales turnover and profits will be impacted. And to how long, it is very difficult. Okay. That is the one point.
Yeah. I think today we are in too much of uncertainty is concerned as regards Nestle is concerned. But whether Nestle is a company or see when you are buying a share or when you are buying a company, what you are doing, you are trying to actually get a share in the future profits of the company. And future profits is not for a particular day or 1 year. It is for a longer period. So as long as the company is able to come out of these issues, yes, because of this issue there will be some immediate impact. It may not have impact. It will not have impact only on Nestle. It can also have impact on a company like ITC. They have also they are into noodles, different products like chewing gum, whatever that other names which are called. Even all those companies will have impact because now people will be very cautious for a few days. Like so many states have decided ban Maggi. now it is an opportunity for others. At the same time, it is a risk also, because suppose if people want to consume noodles and if Maggi is not available, what you will do? You will go to alternative product. But for whatever reason, even in one packet of alternative product, if you find the same problems, then that company also will go the same path. So this kind of issues, which will come across, and as a valuer, you need to decide how you want to treat with these issues. Are these issues permanent or are these issues temporary? In my view, Nestle issue is a temporary issue. It's a multinational with a lot of deep pockets. Whatever corrections are required, I think they will take steps to correct it. For some time, it may have impact on profitability, but in the long run, it should not have the profitability. That is what my say. Unless something drastically happens tomorrow and the government bans Nestle as a company, then it's a different thing. Let's say similarly, we have seen, suppose if you have to value some telecom company whose license is cancelled, then how will you value? Anybody would like to answer? Forget telecom company. If you have to value Kingfisher Airline, how will you value Kingfisher Airline? What kind of assets it has? Replacement value of what? So what assets they have? All real estates are mortgaged. Yes, liability is going to be much more. Somebody said intangibles. What intangibles they have?
It's the brand Kingfisher.
The Kingfisher brand, State Bank of India tried to sell, but there is no buyer. Because Kingfisher brand is owned by UB Group. And only for airline part, they have given it to Kingfisher Airline. Now, today, nobody is going to buy Kingfisher brand because you can't operate your airline under Kingfisher brand. People are not going to come. It's a brand which is tainted. So brand has no value. Any other asset you can think of?
License to operate.
License to operate is already cancelled. So there is nothing, right? Yeah, anything else?
Human capital.
Everybody is left. They are in search of even accountants to write the books of account. So any other asset you can think of for Kingfisher?
Continuing business.
Where is the business? Airline is stopped. So actually there is nothing. Even there, all aircrafts are also on lease. So there is a claim of all these aircraft owners on them. There is no value from any of those assets. At the same time, liabilities are huge. So actually, it is a negative value and very, very high negative value. Even with all this, I think now it is suspended, but otherwise Kingfisher Airline was traded in the stock market. And still the price was around 2 rupees, 3 rupees, market cap of some few hundred crores here and there. So still people are bullish on Vijay Mallya, that something he will do. And there was a price on the stock market. But in reality, actually if you value Kingfisher with any of the methods which we are going to discuss, Kingfisher is no value. The stock market is a different volume. Okay. So with this, I will now start my valuation overview. The presentation is divided into valuation concept. What are the principal methods of valuation? In that, I will be covering discounted cash flow method, enterprise value to EBITDA multiple method, market price method, and net asset method. Also, I will be covering some other important adjustments and some other important aspects which you need to keep in mind when you are doing the valuation. And very briefly on a judicial pronouncement, because in fact we have a detailed 2-hour session, which includes legal cases and judicial pronouncements. So I am just going to cover on the overview basis. Now, some of you, you have done the valuation. So when you are doing a valuation, suppose if you are doing a valuation for a deal, where either party comes to you, what are you trying to arrive at? The number of finally what you arrive. Is it a value or it is a price? Sorry? It's a value. Okay, anybody else has any other view?
It's price.
It's a price. Okay. Now, any of you follow Mr. Warren Buffett? What he says, value is something which buyer will get in future. So today he is actually paying the price, and value, whatever he gets, whether it is higher than the price or lower than the price, that he will come to know in future. Today you don't know. So in that sense, value which is something which you will not come to know in future. At the same time, price is the, it's a negotiation between the buyer and seller. So when we do valuation or whatever number we give, actually it is a starting point for the parties to do a deal, to start the discussion. So if I am representing a buyer, always I will be very conservative in my approach. I will be very conservative about the company, and I will be conservative about my overall valuation workings which I do. At the same time, if I am doing a valuation for the seller, I will be very, very optimistic. I will say future is very rosy and the company is going to outperform the industry and all that stuff. So I will be very, very optimistic as far as if I am doing a valuation for the seller. So in reality, we are neither doing valuation, we are not even arriving at the price. Because value is something which the buyer will come to know in future, and price is the negotiation which both the parties will do it. We are actually trying to give them something to start with. So suppose today, if there is a company which is to be transacted, shares of the company to be transacted, and if it is a unlisted company, so there is no market price. So both the parties, they need something to start with to the discussion, that whether we should talk about value per share at 100 and 200 or it is 500 and 1000. So what we are doing is we are trying to give them something to start with, and then once both the consultants of both the parties, they have given their workings to them, then there will be negotiations, and sometimes negotiations can go on for 3 months to 6 months depending on the issues which are involved. And then finally on a particular day they will arrive at a price. That is, and that price could be different than the numbers which we have given, either as a buyer valuer or as a seller valuer. So it will depend on how desperate either party is to complete the deal, and sometimes you see that somebody wants to acquire a company at any cost. We have seen that in the case of a Chorus, where Chorus initially when Tata's quoted, they quoted around 453 pence per share. And they thought it's a fair value, so they gave open offer and whatever was required under UK takeover code. Then within few days there was another South American company, CSN. They came into picture and entire matter went into auction. And I think auction was conducted after 1.5 months, and ultimately Tata's got Chorus at 603 pence per share. So in that case, certainly the value of the company would not have changed in 1 month from 453 to 603, but price changed. Why price change? Because there was another buyer, and that buyer wanted to, and so there was a competition was created, and that is where the price of the share went up. In fact, at that point of time, Mr. Tata also made a statement that we had not reached our limit. When they were bidding, he said we had not even reached our limit. It means in his mind, maybe they had some higher number, maybe 620 or 630 or 650, we don't know. But suddenly he said 603 was not our limit. So they had something high in the mind, but because at 603 the other party did not bid further, the deal was concluded. So in that case, the value would not have changed, but price changed because there was another buyer. And what actually they have got is something which future has told them. Chorus, if you see, today it is not doing well. Tata has written off in this March quarter almost 5,000 crores of their investment in the UK steel business. So something which they thought at that point of time was a superb acquisition, somehow it has not turned out to be a good acquisition. It has turned out to be not a good experience. Similarly, after some time, they went and acquired JLR. Now, when they acquired JLR, all the analysts around the world, they were saying that Tata has made a blunder, because it was actually acquired for a sum, but they inherited a lot of liabilities of JLR. And people were saying that Ratan Tata has gone mad and he has acquired JLR only because he wanted to acquire that iconic brand, because he had flair for that brand. And everybody was saying that it's a very expensive acquisition. Tata Motors has inherited a lot of liabilities, and company is certainly not worth what they have done. Now you see today what has happened. Actually it's an entirely reverse case of Chorus. JLR is doing extremely well. Tata Motors in India is not doing well. In fact, Tata Motors entire profit comes from the JLR business. And JLR is so successful today that in China and USA there is a waiting period of 3 to 6 months to get a vehicle. So that kind of demand has come up in China and USA. And JLR is doing extremely well. I think in 1 year, JLR made a profit of 28,000 crore rupees. It's a huge profit which they made. But at that point of time, when it was acquired, people they said it's a very expensive acquisition. So all these things, when you are doing a deal, you do it on a certain assumption about the future. But in future, it could be totally different. It may either go as you had projected, or it may go either plus or minus, and that difference could be very, very material. So all these factors will impact the valuation analysis. So value and price, I've given the difference. Then valuation is not an exact science. It is more like an art. So as I said, if 10 people are given the same data, all 10 of them will come with a different number. So it is more like an art. It's not a science where you say that okay, if this is the the parameters, this should be the value. So it is not something which is like a fixed set. You say your mobile. If a particular mobile of Samsung brand is available in say 20,000 rupees mobile, then 20,000 becomes the price. That becomes the value because there is it's over the counter one somebody can go and buy. But when you are talking a complex asset like a business or a share, share in a company, then suddenly all these factors which are outside the financial numbers also come into picture about the buyers and sellers perception about the future, about the industry, all those factors will come out. So it is more like an art. Again, valuation is a date specific. So valuation which is done today may not be valid after 1 month because underlying parameters would have changed, economy would have changed, stock market would have changed. So all these factors would have changed. So it's a date specific. So whenever we do valuation, we always say that what is the reference date with which we are doing the valuation. Then valuation is of course subjective because each and every valuer is going to bring in its own thought process, its own understanding about the company, the business, the economy, the industry. So all these things are subjective parameters. Again, value varies with the situation. So as I said, if you are doing a valuation for a buyer, you will have a different value. If you are doing a valuation for a seller, you will have a different value. If you are doing a valuation for the purpose of merger, then again your valuation methodology what you use and the weights which you give to different methodologies is going to be different. So depending on the purpose for which you are doing the valuation methodologies and your ultimate conclusion will change. Any questions till now? No. Why we do valuation? There are various factors for various needs of the corporates. That is where you need to do valuation. We'll start with the top. There is a merger, demerger. Whenever there is a merger and demerger, you need to do a valuation. Now, one concept which I want to tell you is that when you are doing a when there is a demerger of a company, when you are slicing the company into two, and the shareholders are remaining the same. In that case, actually you don't need a valuation because if I am holding 100 rupees in my pocket, whether I hold 80 rupees in one pocket and 20 in another, or I hold 60 in one and 40 in another, I am the beneficial owner. So there is no change in the beneficial ownership of the business, whether it is pre-demerger or post-demerger. So in that case, you don't need a valuation. I will give you an example. Recently you have seen this IDFC Bank is going to demerge its banking business. IDFC Limited is going to demerge its banking business into IDFC Bank. Now in that case, whoever is a shareholder of IDFC Limited on a particular day will get shares of IDFC Bank. So if I am a shareholder of IDFC Limited and I am going to keep my shares of IDFC Limited intact. So if I am holding one share of IDFC Limited, then one share will remain, plus I will get one extra shares of IDFC Bank. So for if I am holding 100 shares, I will get 100 shares. Somebody is holding 1%, he is going to get 1%. The beneficial ownership in this doesn't change. I continue to hold 1% of the combined entity also on day one. So in that case, you don't need a valuation. What you need to arrive at is only the share entitlement ratio, where for how many shares of IDFC Limited you want to give shares of IDFC Bank. There you will be more guided about how the capital of the IDFC Bank, how the IDFC Bank is will be able to service their capital. So you will be more guided by that. So in this kind of demerger, you don't need a valuation. But suppose,
Sir, I have a question.
yes,
I appreciate your concern, sir, that there will be two shares from one particular company. But at the same time, both get listed. Both may have a different price.
correct.
So where the question comes of valuation, perceiving a valuation in one of the companies, that out of 100, 45 was the value and 65 was the value.
See, that is not the concern of us as a valuer. That is for the market to then decide at what rate it should get traded. Now, what will happen? Like day before yesterday, you were seeing this, or I think yesterday, Adani Enterprise. No, Adani Enterprise, they demerged their port business into Adani Port, power business into Adani Power, and they also, I think, transmission business they have demerged. And residual company is going to have some coal assets and all that. Okay. Now, in this case, at least people were aware what is the price of Adani Port because it is listed. What is the price of Adani Power? It is listed. Other companies, people have to make a guess. So that all these wise people, they will come out with their own research report, and they will say that what should be the price of the residual company. So in this case, I think it got listed at some 120 rupees yesterday, the residual Adani. And I saw one research report from Citi or Morgan Stanley. They said the residual company should be valued at 80 rupees. So that is the view of Morgan Stanley. Now market forces will decide what rate it should get valued. So in all these things, what happens when it gets listed? As per SEBI requirement, the company is supposed to give to people at large in the newspaper and also on the stock exchange website. They have to give all the information about the company and its past financials and all that. So based on that, people will make a idea. People will have the idea what is the rate which it should be traded. Like say for example, when IDFC Bank will get listed, what best people will do? They will see, okay, what is the multiple at which HDFC Bank is traded, what is the multiple at which Yes Bank is traded, which are the peer private sector banks. And somewhere, suppose I'm just giving an example, if say all these private sector banks are traded at 2 times of their book value, maybe on day one, IDFC Bank will trade at 2 times of the book value. Then it will depend on the demand supply and also the other investors, investors they want to take a bet on the company, and accordingly it will get listed. Like say, it is possible today, some investors they don't want to buy IDFC Limited because it's a infrastructure lending company. But same investor, once it becomes a normal commercial bank, they could be interested. So today they will not buy, but they will buy when it gets listed. So maybe at that point of time price may go up because there are more buyers. Or it could be other way around. Some shareholders of who are interested only in the infrastructure lending business, they will get free shares of IDFC Bank, but they said no, we are not interested in bank shares, so they may sell the shares. So then market forces will decide the rate at which it is traded. But to start with, company will have to give information in public domain about the carved out financials of the business, balance sheet, P&L, those kind of information they will have to give. Okay. Now, but there are other kind of demergers where you need a valuation. So, like say for example, today Century Textile is a listed company, and it has a textile business and a cement business. And everybody knows that ultimately it has to go to Kumar Mangalam Birla Group, Aditya Birla Group, it has to go. So suppose tomorrow, if Kumar Mangalam the Aditya Birla Group decides that we want to demerge cement business of Century Textiles into Ultratech, then one is to value Century Textiles cement business separately, one is to value Ultratech as a company separately, on a fair value basis, and then arrive at the swap ratio. Because in that case, the shareholders are not common. Shareholders are different. There could be some shareholders in Century Textile, they are not shareholders in Ultratech, or vice versa. But even if shareholders are not common, the percentage could not be common. So in that case, you will have to do a valuation like a normal merger, because there the worth of the people is going to get impacted. So there is a difference in case of a demerger. If it is a vanilla demerger, where mirror image is created, you don't need valuation. But if it is not a mirror image, then you need a valuation. Next is the private equity. All these private equity funds, when they want to invest in the unlisted companies, they need to do the valuation. So that is another big practice which we have. Then IPO, FPO not much, but IPO yes. Companies when they are coming with the IPO, they want to know internally that what is the price at which they should come out with the public issue. Of course, it depends on the market forces, and sometimes if like last 4 days what has happened to the market, all your valuations will go for a toss because so you thought that today multiples of all the companies are say around 10 times, and because market falls, the entire sentiment becomes negative. So then your IPO may not be successful. So all those risks are there, but yes, when the promoters they want to know that what is the price at which if they come out with the IPO, the share should be they should launch the IPO. Then family separation, again you need valuation. We have a classic example of Ambani brothers, where they separated their entire empire into between two brothers. So that for that purpose, valuations are required. The next is the purchase price allocation, which President explained that when you are acquiring a business, say you acquire a business for a lump sum consideration, you acquire the business for say 100 crores, and the value of tangible assets and net current asset in the books is say 40 crores. So what traditionally people are doing, the balance 60 crores they are putting under goodwill. Now somewhere in the year 2002 there was amendment in Income Tax Act in section 32 which deals with the depreciation, which allowed depreciation on the intangible assets like patent, trademark, copyright, technical know-how, or any other business or commercial right of a similar nature. So after that, people want to allocate this 60 crores difference into the intangibles which they have acquired, so that they are able to record that in the books and claim depreciation on that. So that entire exercise is called the purchase price allocation. You want to allocate the purchase price into the various assets and liabilities which you have acquired. Once Ind AS, IFRS or Ind AS comes in India, for each and everything there is a fair value. So it's going to be a very, very big practice for all the chartered accountants who are in the valuation field. Because in IFRS, each and everything is to be fair value. Not to be fair valued on the first time, but also to be tested for impairment at each periodical interval. So it is going to be like a recurring practice, annuity practice, where each periodical interval companies will come to you that okay, now we need to test our intangible assets for impairment. So that is going to be very, very big opportunity for all of us. Portfolio value of investments, is when the companies, all these private equity funds, when they invest in all these unlisted companies, at periodical intervals they need to declare their net asset value. So when, normally every 31st March, when they prepare their accounts, they need to declare net asset value of that fund. Now because all these are unlisted companies, they need to get it valued. If it was a listed company, mutual fund, they will take the market price and they will arrive at the NAV. But the PE funds, their investments will be in unlisted companies. So they need to go to people like us and get their entire portfolio value. So again, it's a very big opportunity and it's a recurring practice. Then next is the regulatory approval, where for any transaction where FEMA or foreign currency is involved, whether it's inbound or outbound investment, you need a valuation, and Reserve Bank of India comes into picture. So, or you also need some valuation for income tax for the purpose of transfer pricing. We have seen what has happened in the case of Shell India and those kind of companies. Of course, their department has done some arbitrary valuation on their own to raise the demand, but otherwise, you need a valuation in those kind of cases. So again, regulatory approvals or regulatory needs, lot of valuations are required. Then litigation, you need the valuation. If any of the parties are litigating in the court, then they will need the valuation. They will need valuation for arbitration. If some issues are there. Test of impairment already I have discussed that any asset, if you want to test it for impairment, you will need to do a valuation of those assets. Buyback of shares, you need the valuation. And sell and purchase of a business. So either it's a sell and purchase of a share or a sell and purchase of business, you need valuation. Now what are the principal methods of valuation? So in terms of principal methods of valuation, there is earning based approach, market approach, and asset based approach. So broadly these are the three approaches which we have. Within earning based approach, one is a discounted cash flow method. Second is a earnings multiple method. In market approach, either your market price if the shares of the company are listed, or market comparables if the shares are not listed. Asset based approach, you can go as the net asset method, which is the vanilla book value method, or a replacement value or a realizable value method. So broadly, you have these three broad approaches for valuation of share or a business. Of course, there are some other methods are there, like a sales multiple method and all, but those are more used like a cross check. They are not used as a principal method of valuation. Like yesterday you would have read in the newspaper that Imami has purchased that Cash King for 1650 crores, and turnover of that company is only 300 crores. So all the analysts, they made a statement that it has fetched a turnover, the sales multiple of 5.5 times. In reality, I don't know whether they have actually purchased, Imami has purchased based on the sales multiple. It could be based on the profit multiple, but what comes out in the market is what is information available in public domain. What people know is 1650 crores is the transaction price. They know 300 crores is turnover. So people have done the reverse calculation, it is 5.5 times of the sales. In reality, we don't know whether actually the deal is at 5.5 times of sales. It could be at some multiple to profits also. And I think some market report said that profitability of that business is very high, is as high as 60%. So maybe it could be some multiple of the profits. So those are more like a cross check, sales multiple and other kind of methods. Mainly this kind of these methods are used for valuation of shares in the business. Okay. Now I'll start with the DCF as the method. Now before I start, I would like to know if anybody of you know about the DCF. So what is the DCF method and what do you do in that?
Discounting future profitability, cash flow.
Yeah, you are discounting the future cash flows. And you arrive at the present value.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in that, what is the raw material you need? You need the starting balance sheet and you need the future projections. So, it values a business based on the expected cash flows over a given period of time. It involves determination of discount factor and growth rate for perpetuity. Value of a business is aggregate of the discounted value of cash flows for the explicit period and the perpetuity. So, in DCF method, what you do is you prepare the projections for 5 years or 7 years, and in that you arrive at the free cash flow. You arrive at a discount factor and discount the cash flows. But your business is not going to stop at the end of 5 years. Business is going to continue. So then there is a concept of terminal value or the perpetuity value. What is the value which is expected after 5 years? So the combined value of 5 years projections, the present value plus present value of perpetuity is the total enterprise value of the business. Correct? But there are some businesses which are finite business. Say for example, a company which is into the road project. Now, of course, in Maharashtra recently all these lot of tolls are cancelled. But otherwise, if you are in a business of a toll collection, it's a finite business. Normally, the concession period is for 30 years. For 30 years, in 30 years, first 3 years is for the construction. So in that 3 years, you construct the road. Then you have to maintain the road for next 27 years, and you have a right to collect the toll of the vehicles which are passing from that particular road. In that case, you don't do perpetuity because your business is not permanent. Your business is there for a finite period of 27 years. Once the project is implemented. So in that case, you need to project the cash flows for next 27 years and arrive at the discount factor to discount those cash flows and arrive at the value. Because after that, after the end of 27 or 30 years from the zero date, you have to hand over the road to government. It will not be extended. It will not be extended. So in that case, you need to project for entire 27 years. In that case, 5 years projections and perpetuity value will not work. There the entire period has to be projected and arrive at the value. But otherwise, for normal business, you assume that business will continue forever, and you arrive at the projections for 5 years and then take the perpetuity value. So DCF considers the cash flows and not profits. So here cash is king. So if you have cash, then you are king. Now can you think of some business where you have a lot of cash but you may not have profit, or cash comes much before the profit comes? Can you think of some business?
Power industry.
Sorry?
Power industry.
No, power industry cash doesn't come. In fact, sometimes cash never comes. Yeah, that some advances you take, but like the entire cash flow comes earlier.
Some kind of in a road construction company also. EPC contract. Profits may not go. Profits will come.
No, in EPC companies, the cash also comes in future. It doesn't come in advance. Like first to construct the road, so you need to spend 500, 700 crores or 1000 crores or 2000 crores. Okay, so first you need to spend the cash, and then as and when the people start using the road, you will get the cash. But that cash and income both comes together.
Usually clubs will have some such sort of.
Sorry?
Clubs will have such sort of.
Yeah, clubs will have, because there they collect cash upfront. Any other business you can think of? Yeah.
Even some colleges where they take and they
Yeah,
collect.
education, you collect money upfront, fees upfront, and then you have to give services. So those kind of business are where cash comes earlier.
Maintenance kind of.
Yeah, those
AMCs.
AMCs. So you give for water filter or any other your equipment, computer maintenance. There again, cash comes first and profit comes afterwards. Other example is our mobile prepaid, where first they collect the cash and then they have to give services. Another classic example is airlines. Why do they come out with these schemes? You book 3 months in advance and you get lower fare. Because they want to collect cash upfront. Railways, they collect cash upfront and they have made it now 4 months. So there is a more chance of cancellation and more chance of getting the revenue for them. So in all this kind of business, cash comes first and services have to be given afterwards. So in those companies will have a higher value under DCF method and may not have that kind of value under the profit method, PCB or other multiple related method. But there are some other businesses where profit comes first and cash comes afterwards. Now can you think of those kind of business? Where profit comes and cash may or may not come?
Contracts usually.
Yeah, all these contracts, EPC contracts and all. They are normally 5% or 10% of the contract value is kept as a retention money. And sometimes margin itself is 5%. So your entire profit in cash comes after 5 years or 7 years. So those kind of companies will have profit. They will pay tax on those profits, but they may not get the cash. So their volume has to, they keep on increasing their volume to survive. So those kind of companies will have more value under the other methods, but may not have that kind of high value under DCF method. Or any other company, which is where either you need it's a capital intensive, or you need a lot of cash, or you need a lot of working capital. Then again, you may not have much of a cash flow. Like say the companies which are sugar business. Now in sugar business, what happens? The sugar cane, there is a period maximum 4 to 5 months. In that entire sugar cane you have to purchase, you have to crush, and you have to make sugar and keep it with you. But sale will happen for the entire year. So there a lot of money will get blocked into inventory. So those kind of companies will have profit, but their cash flows may or may not come, or it comes with a lag. So those kind of companies will have lower value in DCF as compared to the traditional methods. So here cash is considered to be a king. Now there are two ways of, two approaches for DCF method. One is a free cash flow to firm approach, and second is a free cash flow to equity approach. Under free cash flow to firm, you start with EBITDA. From there you remove the capex, remove the working capital and the tax, and you discount that with the WACC, what we call as a weighted average cost of capital. And the present value of that is the enterprise value. So that value is available to all the providers of capital, that is the shareholders as well as the loan providers. From that value, you remove the loan to arrive at the value for equity shareholders. That is a free cash flow to firm approach. Another approach is the free cash flow to equity approach. There you find out the cash flows attributable to equity shareholders. So you start with their interest is taken as a outflow. The loan which you receive is taken as inflow. The loan which you repay is taken as outflow. So the net cash flows which are there are the cash flows which are attributable to equity shareholders. And those cash flows then you discount by cost of equity. So that is called to FCF to equity approach. So free cash flow to firm approach and free cash flow to equity approach. In practice, 90% of the cases we use FCF approach, so free cash flow to firm approach. Only in very few cases, where like toll project, these road projects, where you can predict your entire cash flows for the entire project period. In those cases, you take free cash flow to equity approach. Otherwise, normally you go under the free cash flow to firm approach.
What is the difference?
Difference I explained. In free cash flow to firm, you start with PBT, add back interest, add back depreciation, reduce capex, working capital and interest. So what you get, free cash flow, is free cash flow available to all the providers of capital. There is equity as well as loan. You do a present value of that, and while doing the present value, you do a weighted average cost of capital. How your business is funded, how much by equity, how much by debt, and what is the weight in that. So discount factor is generally lower because debt is a net of tax, it's a lower cost. So that you arrive, and that is the enterprise value. So that is available to all the shareholders, all the providers of capital. From that you remove the loan to arrive at the equity value. Whereas in FC free cash flow to equity approach, interest is considered as an outflow. You don't add back interest. Loan repayment and loan borrowing is considered as a part of inflow and outflow. So you find out the cash flow attributable to equity shareholders, residual equity shareholders, and you discount that.
In substance, in both the methods, you are eliminating debt.
Yeah, you are eliminating debt. In theory, both the methods should give you the same result, but in reality, it doesn't give. Because always, you will err on when you are estimating the discount factor and all. There will be issues. So in theory, it should give you the same result. In reality, it will not give.
So there, in the FCF to equity, you will use K.
K, cost of equity.
Instead of the back.
Yes. But in theory, it's supposed to give you the same result. In reality, it will not give. There will be some difference. Because debt equity always you'll make some assumption, and that may not be the actual. So those kind of issues come up. Plus there are a lot of practical issues. Like when I'll come to the discount factor, I'll explain to you about the debt equity and all those things. So those things will always have a difference. So in theory it is supposed to give same result. In reality it will not be. So what are the parameters of DCF? In first is the cash flows, in second is the discount factor. So in cash flows you need projections for the horizon period which I explained. You need to decide about the growth rate for projected period and also for the perpetuity or the terminal value. Then into second important aspect here is what is the discount factor which you want to use to discount a particular cash flows. So there you need to work out the cost of equity, cost of debt, and WACC, which is the weighted average cost of capital. So this is the build-up of the cash flows. You need to have a business plan. You need to have projections in place. So what is a business plan? Business plan is entire DCF is based on the assumptions. There is nothing actual except your opening balance sheet. Everything is assumption. When you start your business plan, you start with sales. In sales, volume is assumption. Capacity utilization of your plant is assumption. Price at which you will sell the products is an assumption. When it comes to the cost, raw material consumption norms is an assumption. Raw material price is an assumption. Power and fuel assumption. Your salary wages, each and every item of income and expenditure is an assumption. When you go to the balance sheet items, working capital is assumption, capex is assumption. So entire business cash flows is based on the assumptions. So you have to be very careful when you are reviewing the cash flows. So what kind of analysis which you will do? So when you are reviewing the sales, you will find that what is say for example management has projected that their sales will increase by 15% for next 5 years. So then you will go into details. 15% is going to come from where? Is it going to come out of volume increase or it is going to come out of price increase? Or it could be combination of both. If it is volume increase, is there a sufficient market available to absorb that kind of volume? Because we are not only player in the market. There could be some other players in the market. So what is the their capacity addition? What is your capacity? All those factors will come into picture. Then when it comes to your profitability numbers, how much cost you are going to incur, what is going to be your next net contribution which you will have, how much was the contribution in the past, how much was the contribution in future, or how much is expected in future. There will be always, in terms of expenses, some expenses will be fixed, some will be variable, some will be semi-variable. So all those analysis you will have to do to get a feel about the numbers, about the projections which are given to you.
So instead of assumptions, can it not be based on past trend?
See, it cannot be based on the past trend because, say for example, in the past you have grown by 15%. Is it compulsory that in next 5 years you will grow by 15% because you have grown in the past by 15%?
Then the element of pessimism and optimism will come.
Yes, all these factors will come. So that is where, as a valuer, you need to be careful. Now, suppose if you are doing a valuation for, again, if you are doing a valuation for buyer or a seller, again there will be issues because as a buyer you will be very, very conservative. As a seller you will be very, very optimistic. I'll give you an example. Infosys, maybe somewhere in the year 2000, it was doubling its profit every year. Okay, so people thought that Infosys is a great business, doubling its profit every year. Now today what has happened? Today, even if there is a 2 or 3% growth, analysts, they are happy. Does it mean Infosys is a bad company? Certainly not. It's a good company. But why it is not able to grow? Because of the base effect. See, when you grow at that rate, your base becomes larger and larger. It's easier to grow from 10 to 20, but difficult to grow from 1000 to 2000. Not because your business is bad or something is wrong with the company or the management, because your base has become larger. So maybe in those years they were doubling their profit every year. Now they will take maybe 5 years to double the profit. After that maybe they will take 10 years to double the profit. Because the base effect comes in. So in the past if you have grown at a certain rate, does not mean that you will grow at the same rate for future. Of course it gives you indication. But you need to be careful about all these aspects. So that is where your review as a valuer of those projections becomes very critical. Okay. So one is the business plan. There you have to be careful about the business cycle. Yes.
Question like from your valuation for my business and you enter into the cash you were expecting from the business. But I as a company have got into something very same in the past, which has not been good for me, and I have incurred a loss there. I'm again trying something in the same thing, which could be with some variations in its place. Would I as a valuer take that loss incurred in a similar line sometime back in the recent past in my value?
Not necessarily. See, as a valuer, you need to see in DCF, the assumption it discounts the future. So you need to be more, you need to make a view as a valuer about the projections which are given to you by the company. So if company say in the past they were incurring losses, but now they are expecting to make future, in future they are expecting to make profit.
So there's one assignment that I'm going to get into. There's one, so that assignment I'm assuming is going to give me some X amount of cash flows for the next 5 years, which I come and tell I come and say this is my X amount of cash I'm going to expect from this valuation. However, in a similar project in the past, with some other entity, it did not go out very nicely and I've incurred a loss on it.
So you are in what kind of business? Are you a businessman or you are a valuer?
I'm a business guy.
Okay, you are a business guy. So
I'm saying from a business point of view, I'm going to enter into a new assignment.
it's a consultancy kind of work.
Exactly.
Okay,
So something similar has happened in the past which has not gone out very well. And I have incurred a loss there. So you as a valuer, will you give that importance or will you just discount
Not at all. Not at all. I will see, I have to now take as a valuer, I have to now make a view on what you have projected for future.
So I will discount the fact that you have not,
It's not that I will discount or I ignore the fact that you have made a loss, but when in my analysis, I will be more careful when I am asking question to you. Say for example, if I go to somebody who is, like say, for example, say Paras is doing a consultancy practice, and in the past he has earned X amount of revenue every year and he has earned good amount of profit. if I am doing a valuation for him, I will not go into much of details about his projections because I have past to bank upon. But when it comes to business of your business, I will ask more and more questions to you. How confident you are about achieving what you have now thought going forward? Is it something which is in air or there is something concrete available? If something which is there in air, I will say maybe not, I will not give you value under DCF. You come and demonstrate about your abilities, then I will give you the valuation. Or I say, okay, what she makes sense. It is possible that yes, what she is saying makes sense, and it is possible to get this kind of revenues or cash flows in future. But at the back of my mind, I will always have that in the past you made a loss. So maybe I will use little higher discount factor in your case than what I will use in other case. So I have to counter that with some logic and analysis. But in that, most important is I need to get faith or some gut feel about your business plan. Because ultimately you are going to run the business. I am doing analysis or arriving at the value based on what you say. So as a valuer, I need to get a gut feel. Okay.
As far as DCF method is concerned, while using the number of years for which you for the sectors which are becoming obsolete due to technology, for the businesses, right? Do you completely scrap DCF method? It doesn't need to be taken place, or you take a lesser view. Suppose there is some business which as a value okay, this is being like from cassettes we went to CD, from CD we went pen drives, and now we are going on satellite and everything. So how you then do the valuation of such businesses? Either you do it with lesser number of years, where you can project something, or you just don't take DCF as a method, because it doesn't give you the kind of confidence as a buyer, when you are going to pay something to the seller.
So if it doesn't give you confidence as a buyer, then why buy in the
So
first place?
I'm just trying to arrive at a value. Suppose so what method? Whether can I take a lesser number of years, or whether
See, lesser number of years is not going to help you, because actually when you are buying a business or when you are doing a valuation, whether you take 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, or 7 years, or take a longer period, it's a way to arrive at the value. Actually, you have to take a call on that business. Okay, whether you take 2 years or 5 years doesn't make a difference, because even after 2 years you are going to take perpetuity, even after 5 years you are going to take a perpetuity. Unless you come to a conclusion that this business is there only for next 5 years, and there is no perpetuity, then you will project for 5 years. Or you come to a conclusion this business is there only for next 3 years, then you project for 3 years, and then it's end of it.
it's better?
How you convince?
Sorry?
How you convince the buyer? How the business will continue?
Yeah, how business will continue. Like say for example, you give example of this cassette or pen drive and iPod or whatever that is there. But as long as the company remains in the business and it spends that kind of money on R&D to come out with the next what next, then still as a company and the cash flows it will continue. Maybe the underlying fact, whether it was CD earlier, cassette earlier, CD, and now pen drive, whether those things, those are the mediums. So you see, if you are valuing a company which is only in a manufacture of cassette, and that company has no future, then yes, maybe you will take 3 years or 5 years, or their cash flow will come out and show a declining trend, because cassette is not, maybe after 5 years we don't know whether cassette will survive. Like say today, this television, we are talking about even LCD is outdated. Now we have LED and those kind of this thing. But still, Onida sells a lot of those box TVs in rural market. So it is not that it has gone totally out of business. The market has changed. Earlier it was urban market, now it is rural market. Onida still sells a lot of those box TVs. For how many years we don't know. Maybe after 3 years, rural market also will go on LCD TV. Because always there is a price point and all those factors come into picture. So there you need to decide that whether your business will continue or not. But say if you are a music company, then you are indifferent. What is the medium which is used to for music? Like whether it's a cassette or it's a CD or it's a pen drive, or now you download on a mobile, or tomorrow it could be something else. As long as you have your music bank with you, and you are in the business of generating more and more, the library, what they call, it should be indifferent. Like the Silsila, maybe somewhere in 77, 78 it was that Silsila picture came. That time whatever was the cost of producing the entire picture, the feature film Silsila, only that song is there, that Rang Barse Bige Chunar Wali. And in every Holi, all these news channels, they want to play that song on their news channel because of Holi. The royalty which they collect today, every year, is much more than the cost of making Silsila in that year. So this kind of it becomes, now it has become icon. Like today, if anybody thinks of Holi, one straight away you recollect that particular song. So it has become icon. It has become that kind of, it's like a brand for Holi. So today the kind of royalty which they collect is much more than the cost which they had incurred on manufacturing, because it was maybe 35 years back, 38 years back, it was released. So if you are a music company, you are indifferent. But suppose tomorrow if music gets replaced with something else, then yes, you have to be worried. So actually you have to take a call on the business rather than the this aspect.
So the example which he gave, where there is obsolescence, then in that case definitely you will discount perpetually, right?
Yeah, then yes, then you will not project. Then you will only have to estimate this particular business for how many years it can survive.
Like film production company, how you value, because each time it is a different bill, so then you have to go for intangible, like it is a Yash Raj or this Dharma production, and you are paying twice for that because each picture you don't know how the business will be done.
See,
And
there-
the risk is always very high.
Yeah, it's a high risk, high reward game. Because if a very good picture film may do a business of 20 crores, and not so good film can do 100 crores. It all depends on the star cast and whether which other picture is available, whether it is released in vacation or it is released in something else. So all those things will come into picture. But like say companies like Yash Raj and all, their value is not lot of value is derived from their library which they have. Like that Dilwale Dulhania, that rights of Dilwale Dulhania they have already sold in the past. But today they are thinking if they would have kept that rights, they would have made much more money. So for them, value is derived more from their library and their ability to do business. In business, some films will do well, some films will do average, some films may flop. So you need to take the average. What is the past? But in those cases, maybe DCF is not the correct method, because you can't project. You have to then go based on the multiple method. Okay, DCF is you will do more when it's more like a predictable business something. This is very high risk, high reward game.
Is DCF appropriate when the company is just a new entrant or new company? Like for example, for the RBI purpose also DCF is applied. So is it a correct methodology, because there is no past in it?
See, for new company, only method which you can use is a DCF, because of course net asset value you can use, because whatever is the net worth, you divide by number of shares, you will get net asset value. But in terms of business value, there is no past. So either you make projections for 1 or 2 years, which is showing profit, and apply the multiple of a comparable company. That is possible, or you do a DCF. So these two approaches one can use. Your RBI earlier they were saying only DCF. Now they have said any method which is internationally accepted. Because DCF people are finding it very difficult to use, especially in some companies like say startup companies. What you do? Like today, suppose if you have to value Flipkart, how will you value Flipkart? The value of Flipkart increases by $5 billion every month. Whether it is worth that much or not, that is a different thing. But otherwise, it depends on the underlying business and how you want to value.
Okay, you were also, somebody said that on the projections, you said that you will try and understand the projections and try to understand the business, which of course is required for any valuation.
Use the mic.
Oh, sorry. Yet in all the cases of valuations that one has seen, there is a clear exception by the valuer saying that these are projections of management and we have not done any due diligence on that. So how does that reconcile?
There is no reconciliation in that. as a valuer, you are, you don't want to take ultimately the responsibility. Whether as a valuer, even as a management. Of course, even as a company, projection is the best estimate, and with a given set of assumptions at a particular point of time. I've yet to see a projection which is actually achieved. Okay, projections are never achieved. That is why it is called projection. So there is always a risk which is attached to that. So as a valuer, always you want to say that it's a management projection, it is their estimate, and you are not giving any assurance that these projections will be achieved. It is to cover yourself, and also to give the reader that you have, based on these numbers, you have done certain analysis, which is done normally, which is done, and arrive at the value. It happens, forget giving the report and all. Whenever you are going to do, when you go to meet a management, and management is given very aggressive projections. Sometimes as a valuer, it becomes very difficult for you to even challenge those assumptions. Because CFO, the company will say that I am in my business, I know my business much better than what you know. Right. And he is right, because he is running the business, he knows how he is going to run the business. So it is their assumption. What as a valuer you are supposed to do is supposed to question them, and question them not to do anything else, to get yourself the feel about the, when I come to discount factor, I will touch that aspect also, about the feel and how to put that feel into the numbers. Okay. So we discussed about the business plan, the projections, business cycle. You need to be careful. Then another important aspect is the working capital, because money gets, if you do a sales and you don't realize the money, it remains in receivables. Gives you profit, doesn't give you cash flow, because to that extent money gets stuck in the working capital. So you need to be careful about the inventory, receivable, payables. So entire working capital assumptions one has to be careful. Next is a capital expenditure. Now you need two kinds of capital expenditure. One is a capital expenditure for growth. Second is a capex for maintenance. So suppose if going forward, management is projected that I am going to grow at 15%, and in that 15% projection growth assumption, say 7% is coming out of volume growth. Then you need to see, do you have sufficient capacity to manufacture that extra volume? If it is not, you may have to put extra capex. Sometimes but when you take the capex, you will take the capex only which is planned. Say for example, you are doing a valuation of a cement company, and it is a 2 million ton cement plant. And management is giving you a projection where they are saying that today it is 2 million, next year we are going to make it 4 million. So then you will ask, okay, when you are saying you will double the capacity, what actually work has been done on the ground? Whether your board has approved the capex, have you tied up the funds for this capex, have you placed the orders for plant and machinery, whether EPC contract is given to somebody to erect the plant and machinery and start making the cement. If yes, then yes, we take that capex and the income which is going to come out of that, doubling the capacity. But somebody says that okay, today I am 2 million, next year I am going to make it 4 million, for which all these things are in place. After 3 years, again I am going to make another 2 million tons. So that you will not take into calculation, because that way anybody can project anything in future. What you will take is something which is there today and something which is planned and which you can see, there is a foreseeable future. So you can see that something which is happening. Then only you will take that capex. If some capex is planned after 5 years, when nothing is done today, in a commodity kind of a business, it is of no value. Because otherwise you will go on projecting, then I will go on putting capex and I will go on earning more and more cash flows. So you will take something which is there today and which is planned. But at the same time you need some maintenance capex, because because of wear and tear, your plant and machinery may need some extra capex. Of course, some you will put as a part of R&D, repairs and maintenance cost. But you may also need some maintenance capex. So those also you need to keep in mind. So capex is divided into two parts: growth capex and the maintenance capex. Both needs to be properly captured. No, it depends on what is the purpose for which you are doing the valuation.
If the purpose is that equity is being infused and I am doing the discounted cash flow for that purpose, so do I need to take note after infusion of
See there, you need to see that whether that equity infusion. So, if I am understanding your question, there is a growth or capex which is planned. For that capex, you need some equity.
Yeah.
And what rate that person should invest. For that, you are doing the valuation.
Right.
Correct? In that case, you need to see whether the current owners are they capable of completing the project on their own.
If not,
If not, then you will not even take the capex. Because if say I am a person who is putting in money, and with my money you are going to do the project, and without my money this project is not possible, then why should I give value for something what I am bringing to the table?
and if they're possible, and there is an additional benefit which are getting in terms of working capital or additional utilization to the capex, then what should be done? Then should that money inflow and capex should be considered?
So what I am saying is, actual inflow you will never consider, because I cannot to arrive at what rate I should invest. Say today value of the company is based on DCF is 30 rupees, and somebody is putting 300 crores. Okay, so then 10 crore shares has to be issued. Now how this 30 rupees is arrived? For that if you put 300 crores as inflow, then my money is used to arrive at the value for me, which is not going to work. So inflow in any case has to be excluded. I am saying about the project cash, the project, the volume growth. So volume growth, is it possible without my money? If it is not, then I will not even forget inflow, I will not even take volume growth. But there are some promoters who are capable of achieving the volume growth with their own money. Suppose if I give the same example of cement, I am a 2 million ton, say my company is a 2 million ton plant. Then I am capable of executing this project even if you don't invest.
But then there is some goodwill of the company and other promoters of the company combined with that capex, that company will grow at a better rate. So that factor, how do we factor in? So if the capex info comes in and the goodwill of the company and whatever other resources company has, those are combined, the company will grow at a higher rate. So if we exclude that capex and everything, that factor is not factored in anyway.
Yeah, that factor is not factored in. Maybe then you will arrive at the value without these factors, but separately, they will negotiate and arrive at, give some control premium or some premium they will give. That is a part of negotiation. That will come when we come I will cover those aspects also. But DCF per se, you will then exclude, that inflow and also the capex, because without that it is not possible.
So capex you will do based on pre-money.
Yeah, so entire valuation has to be done on a pre-money basis.
So the existing promoters are only going to put in money later. Can that be taken and not the opposite person?
No, that also cannot be taken unless that money is already decided, the per share value is decided. The promoters are going to put in it, say 30 rupees per share. Then you take that 30 rupees, the inflow, and also take the higher number of shares. Because there the per share value is decided. But you cannot take the inflow for which you are doing the valuation. Okay. So, capex we discussed. Next is depreciation and amortization. That is a non-cash expenditure, so that has to be added back when you are doing the cash flow. And tax, of course, is an outflow, so it has to be reduced. So this is broadly the build-up of the cash flows.
Working capital you will do it by actually drawing the projected balance sheet.
Yes, you do working capital, capex, everything. So ideally you need to prepare projected P&L, projected balance sheet, and from both you will arrive at projected cash flow. Very technically, if you don't prepare the entire balance sheet, as long as you prepare these items, you can arrive at the cash flow. But then having arrived all this, it's just putting in a particular format. Otherwise you have all the components of a balance sheet, because you have capex, you have working capital, and it covers everything. So when you are reviewing the projections, these are the factors which you need to keep in mind. It is industry and company analysis. If there is a dependence on a single customer or a supplier, again there is a risk which is involved. Say for example, say fertilizer companies, they have to import all the raw materials. So they are imported, they are dependent on the overseas market. And some of the raw materials are manufactured, there is a cartel. So again, those kind of issues will come in. Installed capacity, we discussed. The existing policy and legal framework you need to keep in mind. If tomorrow something happens in the government policy, then your entire, the projections may change. Then capex we discussed, working capital requirement we discussed, and alternate scenarios and sensitivities again, is very important, which you need to keep in mind when you are doing a valuation. So as a valuer, when you are reviewing the projections, you need to also do some sensitivity analysis. So say for example, if management has projected that their sales will increase by 15%. As a valuer, you may want to see that, okay, what happens if sales don't grow by 15%, it increases only by 10%. How does it impact my value? So say reducing sales growth by 5%, if changes my value by 20%, then it is very sensitive. So I need to be very, very cautious about that particular assumption. But changing projection sales by 5% reduces my value only by 2%, then there is something which is not very sensitive. So you need to find out in all the assumptions in the projections which are the sensitive parameters in the projections. In those sensitive parameters, you need to be doubly sure that yes, I am comfortable with this particular number. Because changing one assumption by 2% changes your value by 20%, that assumption is very, very sensitive. And you have to be very, very careful about that particular assumption. So that is always will do alternative scenarios and the sensitivities when you are doing the projections analysis. Okay. Next comes the discount factor, which is the weighted average cost of capital. So here you are trying to arrive at the cost of equity. I'm going to, we can email this presentation, so those of you who don't want to write, you don't write. We'll circulate the presentation. So I think we can also put on the website. I think we also put on the website of the...
Can we have the presentation before the actual...
that normally I avoid, because what happens if I give in advance, people will straight away go to the last page. And they don't listen here. That is why I don't give in advance. But some other speaker may give you in advance.
Yeah, I think he's right, because your tendency of going to the next slide.
But only thing is that we can just
distracts
write
your
the
mind.
notes, as and when the speaker is talking, we can write the notes, which is relevant to that particular slide.
Yeah. So the notes you can write in your page and presentation you will get.
If we receive for next, we will try to give it at the session itself.
In fact, Zembar had asked me that whether you want to circulate. So I said, I don't know, Sujal circulates, I never circulate. It depends on the speaker. Okay. Next we have the, what is the thing of it? 550. Or we'll complete this year and then we can another important aspect in DCF, first is the projections, second is the discount factor. So here we need to arrive at the cost of equity and cost of debt. Cost of debt is fairly simple. You need to see what is the rate at which the company is borrowing the debt, and debt gives you advantage in terms of it's interest is tax deductible. So you work out the cost of debt on a net of tax basis. If you have multiple debts, say working capital, term loan, or you have say foreign currency borrowing, then you will see what is the weighted average blended cost of debt of all these borrowings together, and that becomes the cost of debt. Another important, very important aspect is the cost of equity. What is the cost of equity, which you want to apply? Now, before I go into the theory, I want to ask you, suppose all of you have 10 crores in your pocket, and if you have to put money into the equity, how much return will you expect? 15 to 16%.
20%.
25.
20%.
You will expect 20%. Somebody said 25%.
25, yeah, I see.
You said 25. Any other number from this side?
100%
Who is the person? Who is expecting 100%? No, that is you. No, I am asking you, is it a business or it's a speculation? Investment 200%, who is going to give you? Then it has to be really a speculative business. Either you will get 200% or you will not get anything. I am talking of normal, normal sensible business. Nobody is going to give 200% return. Yeah, any other number?
Normally, what is the rate of interest on government securities? You had about 50 to 75% of that. That should be the
9 to 10%.
Okay. That is your way of calculating.
9 to 10%.
Sorry?
9 to 10%.
Okay, he is saying 9 to 10%. So we got answer from 9 to 10% to 20 to 25%. Okay. Now I ask the same question. You have to put money into equity, but you have to put money into real estate business. Whether the answer will remain the same or it will change. How much it will become? 20% will become how much? Who said 20%? How much it will become? 36%. So why it has changed? Because of the risk perception has changed. So ideally, when you talk about the cost of equity, you should have the access to the investors who are putting in money, and that should become the discount factor. So when I said you want to put money into equity, I got answer from 9% to 20% or 25%. Moment I said it's a real estate business, it said no, I want 35% or I want 40% because your risk perception has changed. So the investors who are actually putting in money, whatever return which is expected by them, that should become the discount factor. Like say today you go to any private equity players, they will say our return expectation is minimum 22%. So if I am doing a valuation for a PE firm, 22% should become my discount factor. Because I am doing a valuation for him and his expectation is 22%. Suppose if you are doing a valuation for some company, normally companies when they are putting up a project, they will say that there is a concept of IRR, what is the return which is expected out of that project. So the IRR is nothing but the discount factor which is expected by that particular company. So any project which gives a return below that IRR, they will not put project unless it's a compulsion project. Otherwise minimum IRR expectation should be achieved. So that IRR should become the discount factor. So ideally you should have access to the investors who are putting in the money, and whatever is their expectation should become the discount factor. In the absence of that, you go to a surrogate method which is called the CAPM, Capital Asset Pricing Model, which bifurcates the cost of equity into three parts. That is a risk-free return plus beta into equity risk premium. So that is that is the formula for cost of equity. This gentleman said that whatever is the return on government security, you have maybe 75% over and above that. So that is his way of calculating the cost of equity. The idea is, so there we are bifurcating the the cost of equity into three parts. There is a risk-free return plus beta into equity risk premium. So what is the risk-free return? Can anybody tell me? RBI bonds. Government bonds. Why do you assume government is risk-free?
You receive money. There is no risk.
Less risky than other investments.
What is? So why do you assume government is risk-free?
It's a government guarantee. It's a foreign guarantee, sir.
But the guarantee is coming from how they are going to. What is the total borrowing of government of India? Moment you will not put any money into government security. Okay, forget that. What is the in our budget when they declare the expenditure? How much of total expenditure is on the interest? Last year I think it was 33%. So 33% of total expenditure of government of India is only to service the loan. From where they are going to repay the loan?
In past they have never failed.
So they have never failed in the past. So that is what you assume. That is why you assume. But what happens if you are doing a valuation of a company which is there in Greece? There the government has defaulted. Then past history has no meaning. See what why do you assume government is a risk-free? Because one, she said, of course, government can print the notes and they will meet its obligation. Second is government has the ability to raise the taxes if there is a need for them to pay. Both these things will work to some extent. It will not work beyond. Because you print a note beyond a particular point, it will go into inflation, hyperinflation. We have seen what has happened in Zimbabwe. There is a hyperinflation situation there. Or If you raise the taxes beyond a point, people will stop paying the taxes. Like in India, earlier taxes were as high as 97% with surtax and all those whatever taxes people used to call. So if the tax rate is 97%, people will say why we want to why we want to earn profit, because out of 100 rupees, if 97 rupees I have to give government of India, why I should earn 100 rupees? I am better off not doing anything. So beyond the point, people will stop paying taxes. Both these things will work to some extent. Beyond that, it will not work. But still, with all these things, we assume government is a risk free. Now, what is the rating of Government of India bonds in India given the CRISIL? It's a AAA. CRISIL values Government of India at AAA, it gives a rating of AAA to Government of India. Now, which is the holding company of CRISIL, which is S&P, Standard & Poor. What is India's rating in global market? Yeah, it's whatever that rating is, it is just one notch above the default grade. So one notch down and we are default. Why? Because Government of India, the assumption is that government will not default in the local currency. They can either print the notes or they can somehow pay the money. But in international market, Government of India cannot print dollar notes. Certainly not. So that is why we get a rating which is just one notch above the default grade. Because in international market, our borrowing is actually very large. So today, actually, if somebody does a proper analysis, then Government of India is not a risk-free. It's a very, very high-risk investment. Unless we have faith in current government, we assume that they will do something drastically different. Otherwise, it's a very risky proposition. That is where rating of Government of India globally is very, very low. But in the absence of anything else, you assume government is a risk-free. Then the next important is the equity risk premium. What is the premium which you are expecting over and above the risk-free rate? So that what parameter you have? If you want to put money into stock market, you have Sensex. Sensex started with the value of 100 from 1/4/1979. Today it is somewhere around 26,000. So 100 over the years has become 26,000. If you put this into the Excel sheet and see what is the CAGR which Sensex has given, somewhere you will get around 17% return which Sensex has given over the years. In some years, it could be 15%, some years it could be 19%. But by and large, Sensex has given return of 17% CAGR. So 17% is the overall return which is given by the market. 17% minus current, say, risk-free return of 8%. So 17 minus 8, 9% becomes the equity risk premium. So 8% is the risk-free return, 9% is the equity risk premium, and there is a factor which is called beta, which measures the volatility of a particular stock vis-a-vis Sensex and gives a number. That number can range anywhere from 0 to 2. So in theory it should not go into minus, but sometimes it goes into minus also. So that beta factor you apply to the equity risk premium and you arrive at the cost of equity. So this is how you arrive at the cost of equity and your cost of debt. So weighted average of that becomes the WACC, which is the weighted average cost of capital. So you use this factor to arrive at, to discount the projections which you have. I complete this here?
You need some break.
No, it's okay. I can talk for 10 minutes.
I think we'll break here.
Okay, we'll break for 5 minutes. We'll complete
10-15 minutes.
And then
These friends, we have Mr. Sujal Shah. He is the past president and advisor to this corporate member committee. And he is also a valuation expert and he is the one who has structured this entire program. So, big applause to you. Once we are done with our refreshments and tea, we will restart the session.
वीडियो बन गया
चला